Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Okay, I know we got a couple of them calling in. Again, if you've called in to the meeting, please identify yourself.
Alex Jensen.
I've got Alex Jensen.
Rick Kiley.
And Rick Kiley. Thank you. Community reports. Councilmember Starr, Heritage Museum Board.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Brevity.
City Council open discussion. If there's none, I would like to read a letter. Mr. Kiley.
Real quickly, did not hear a word that Councilor Starr said.
Can you hear me, Mr. Kiley?
Yes, I can.
Councilor Starr was unable to attend the meeting, but he sent us a review and the minutes. It should be in your email. So we'll try and work on.
They do need to hold one or more public hearings. Okay, so that's a standalone public hearing for the purpose of getting feedback on the plan that they're proposing. That's not to say they don't meet more frequently. Back in 2017, they met 3 times to work on the plan. Back in 2011, they met several times. So they'll meet as often as is needed to actually come up with a plan. And then they submit the plan to the City Council. As I mentioned before, it's typically under reports of officers and boards at the end of our regular agenda. And typically the chairperson or representative has been here to present the plan to the council. And again, as I mentioned before, if the council does disapprove the plan, again, you don't have to approve it, you don't have to accept it, but if you do disapprove it, if you reject it, then the commission would have to revise that plan. So the districting criteria in and of itself. Really the key thing is we have 5 districts. Each is composed of a series of precincts, anywhere from 5 or 6 up to about 12 amongst each one of the council districts. And their job is to take those precincts and kind of move them around, and I'll get into more detail in that in a second, so that we have basically equal size council districts in terms of population. And so that's what that number 1 bullet there talks about, is you want them to be as equal in population as possible, but it does provide for a 5% deviation average population amongst them. And so just to kind of put that in perspective, they came up with about 7 different alternate plans back in 2017, and 3 of them were excluded because they exceeded that 5% deviation. So there can be a lot of great ideas out there, but if we're not keeping the council districts as equal as possible, then they're really not viable plans. The next one, number 2, districts shall consist of contiguous territory. Again, that's so that we don't have islands of, say, the Southwest District up in the Northwest District. We want to keep everything together. No voting precinct, number 3, as set by the county, shall be divided in the formation of districts. This is important because this is not an exercise in changing our precinct boundaries. You do have the authority as a council to do that, but that's not within the authority of the commission. And when it comes to this particular redistricting effort, the commission has to work off of the precincts as set by the counties. Okay, so that's generally going to be the precincts as they are set right now, which between us and Lincoln and Minnehaha counties, we do have the same precincts anyway, but there'll be no adjustment of any of the precincts. So we can't take precinct 5-13 and split it down the middle. All those precincts have to stay together or unchanged. So the number of districts, number 4, which include territory in more than one county, shall be as few as possible. Again, pretty straightforward. We want to try and minimize the number of districts that we have in a single county, and really we try to do that each time, but it is very difficult, particularly with that population down in Lincoln County. So we can always expect 2, and there was a recommendation for 3 districts touching Lincoln County last time. Obviously, that one with 3 was not accepted. And then lastly, consistent with the foregoing provisions, the goal is to have the aggregate length of all district boundaries as short as possible. So really what we don't want to do is have one of the districts wrap around, say, another. It can be contiguous, but we don't want it extending, say, way too far west or too far east or too far north, depending on whatever council district we're talking about. So these are criteria that we present to the districting commission, and they'll use that in order to formulate the plan that they want to present to the public and subsequently present to you all. Now, I don't have a slide on this, but just to let you envision what it actually looks like. Typically, the first meeting we have with them, or one of the first meetings, Jeff Schmidt will present to them a map that shows the population in each one of our precincts. From there, he'll do some analysis. He'll show where the disparities are, where the council districts are unequal. And then at that point, it's where the commission, based sometimes on recommendations that Jeff makes, because he comes up with some alternatives given the math, they can start choosing where to place precincts. So in other words, what happened last time is precinct 3-5 used to be in the Northwest precinct, and then it moved into the Central District. And that's how the adjustment was made. So it merely renamed the precinct, put it in the Central District, and there you have your new council district boundary. What we've seen in the past is that generally the central district expands and contracts with these districting efforts. Of course, we don't know what's going to happen this spring until we see the actual census numbers. So talking about the timeline, tomorrow I will send out a press release, and hopefully some folks are tuning in today. I sent a few notes out. We'll send a press release out and hopefully get some interest in this. I think we will. Last time, back in 2017, we had close to 30 applications. We actually had more than 30 applications, but a few were ineligible. We do outline in the press release what the criteria is, and in charter it states what the criteria is. One of the provisions is that you can't be a sitting board member, say on one of our other boards. So there were a few folks that we did have to screen out, but by and large we had close to 30 people. So that was a really good showing, I thought, back in 2017, hoping to see the same thing again this year. So if we want to stay on track to make those appointments by early December, and I'm recommending December 1st because we really need to have it done by December 12th, then what I would recommend is that the applications are due November 6th by 5 p.m. That's a Friday. And here's where you all will come into play, and I would just recommend we kind of keep with the same process that we used last time, which I'll briefly explain for those of you who weren't there. We collected the applications, we sorted them by council district, and then developed basically a matrix, sent the applications home with each one of the council members. They reviewed all of them. We got back together in an executive session and did not come to a decision, but came to sort of a consensus on where the candidates fell in terms of who should be proposed as an appointee. And it generally worked out pretty well. I think it would be advisable to go with the same process this year. And this way that will get us to December 1st and a resolution. So with applications due on November 6th, shortly thereafter we'll furnish copies to you all with a matrix to score them. And then we would meet on November 17th, go through the applications, the applicants, and sort of your rundown of who you prefer to be a top candidate, say, for each one of the districts. And from there, I would be able to draw up a resolution with 2 sponsors and present it to the council on December 1st. So, December 1st, the commission would be appointed. When they start meeting is sort of to be determined. That would be up to the commission itself. And when I get to the next slide, you're going to wonder why we're actually doing this in December. But suffice it to say, remember, we had that requirement to appoint the districting commission no later than 1 year and 5 months prior to the next election. So, we don't expect to see the census results until March or April. And Jeff will keep an eye on this. If you look at the census website, it says they expect to have them released by March 31st. Obviously, we're hoping for that to happen. But between the appointment of those members and even the release of the census data, we do expect to meet at least once just to orient the group, talk about open meetings laws, talk about the process in here and just about their responsibilities in general. Then I don't foresee them convening again until after the census results are released. Of course, the body may decide something else and they may want to meet earlier. But if you remember before, there are a few things that the districting commission has to do. They have to have a public hearing and they have to present the plan to the city council. That plan has to be presented to the council no later than 9 months prior to that next election. So really, I think the easiest thing to do is jump down to July 13th, 2021. That's really the latest they have until they can present. That's a council meeting date. That's the latest they have to present a plan to you to stay within that 9-month or outside of that 9-month requirement. 30 days prior to their submission to the plan, at least 30 days, they need to hold at least one public hearing. And prior to that public hearing, they need to make the final plan available to the public. So that puts us back into May. So my point here is that we essentially have, if we get the census data, say at the end of March, we have the month of April to come up with a plan and get the process going so that it may be presented to the city council by July 13th. Now, that's not to say we're pigeonholed by this particular timeline here, because our charter does provide for the fact that if we don't have the census data by the turn of the new year, then we may adjust those requirements up there by ordinance. And that's explicitly stated in the charter. So if that does arise, if we find that we're getting late and the commission finds that they need more time, then you could expect the commission to come back to you as a city council with a recommendation to adjust that timeline. We don't want to go too far because, of course, we have an election coming up in 2022. So assuming we stay on track after July, at some point, we'll pass an ordinance making those precinct designation changes. And of course, really, the end result will be the city elections in April of 2022. So to that end, we will open up applications. There is a web page on the city clerk's site accessible through the city council web page that has information about the district and commission. We do encourage people to look at it. It's up there right now, but we won't start accepting applications until tomorrow, the 14th. And again, we do want to see folks put that application in. Application is similar to our other boards and commissions that are managed by the administration. Our application is tailored, obviously, just to the district and commission. It requests certain background information for each one of the candidates, and also asks them to explain a little bit about themselves and possibly provide a resume or some other evidence showing why they would be a good candidate for this commission. Again, the deadline for that is going to be November 6th at 5 p.m. If we do run into a challenge with applications, obviously I'll come back to the council, but I really am hoping, despite everything else that's going on, that we do get a good amount of applications, but of course I'll keep you up to date on that if we find, again, some challenges across the board or just in some districts. And so with that, I would open it up to any questions you have, and again, Jeff is here. Be happy to answer any questions you have.
Questions, Councilor Brekke?
Just one, have you had any problem getting members that way? Has that always worked for us, that we've been able to just solicit them and then enough people have applied?
For the applications?
Yeah.
No, I mean, in my experience, 2017, we had about 30 applications, and they all came in relatively quickly, so we're hoping to see the same thing.
Good.
Other questions, Councilor Erickson?
Thank you. Can you go to slide 3, please? I know Councilor Urpenbach and I, last time we did this, both kind of raised our eyebrows to the composition where it says no more than 3 commission members may belong to the same political party, because so many times we hear people kind of hitting the nonpartisan drum, and this is in our charter, right? It's not ordinance.
This is charter, yes.
Yeah, so I think that's really interesting that it has to be, that it's explicitly explained what they can and can't be for that. So it raised my eyebrows last time, it raises my eyebrows again this time, that I think that it's interesting that whoever was the founding members of our charter felt it was so important to make sure that a partisan type political party was mentioned within our charter for this particular item. My question to you is, you mentioned if folks can't currently be on any boards, can they be elected in other areas, or is it just a city board? What if they belong to a county commission board, or
I would not exclude them.
or if they're elected to the school board or the legislature?
I do not believe there's a prohibition on, or correction, there's no prohibition on being an elected official outside of the city. So if you're an elected official or a board member in the city, then no, you can't.
For the city, but what
Correct.
if you're...
For the city.
Okay, for the
For
city,
the city of Sioux Falls, yes.
Okay, that makes sense. And I don't know, I mean, this is our first time going around, and last time no one was elected the last time either that wanted to be a part of it, but just kind of curious on how that works, but I think that makes sense that obviously none of us would be on that redistricting commission. Yeah. My other question is I know, I don't believe this is anywhere in there, but it's been kind of by tradition that folks have not been redistricted out. I know when I was in the legislature, it can change really where folks live, and even when that was done many, many years ago, 10 years ago, there were some members that were now out of District 11 and in District 12 or 13 or whatever close by. Is that kind of our goal again, is making sure that we still uphold those? I mean, it's not going to impact anybody necessarily.
It's not a criteria to not district somebody out of their council district, but there is a provision in charter that says if you are moved outside of your council district due to redistricting, then you would still finish your term.
You'd still finish the term, which totally makes sense. And I know that we kind of last time really made sure we were careful with that to make sure that any current officials are not impacted by that
And,
way.
and last time, I mean, in 2017, the commission was aware of basically where all our district council members resided. But if I remember correctly, I don't even think that it became an option, so.
Yeah, I don't think it was an option, and I don't think it was very close. It wasn't even, I mean, there was no options presented that way, and it wasn't in to where any of them were even close to where that makes sense.
And just kind of slightly related to that, just a reminder that the charter did change to require a 6-month residency requirement in a district to run for that district seat. So, of course, if everything goes according to plan, then we'll have this done 9 months out. But if we do get pushed back, I think that would be something that the council might want to be cognizant of in terms of adjusting the timeline.
Gotcha, that makes sense. Thanks for all your work, I know, on this, and Jeff, thank you as well, because I know it's a lot of mapping and making sure everything is provided to our citizens that serve on these boards, and it's certainly very important to make sure that each of the districts are as equal and as balanced, just like they do in the legislature. They try to make sure those are as balanced as possible as well with the constituents that live within each district. So thanks for everything you do, and look forward to moving along.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? Those on the phone, questions? Hearing none, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
We'll continue to move on. Items B and C on your agenda are going to be moved to the next meeting on the 19th. So now we're going to item D, conflicts of interest, ethics training ordinance. Jenna Brekke.
Bit about our ordinance in general and why I believe this makes sense. But I would also start out by saying it's a draft. It's got big bold letters that say it's a draft. I'm presenting it again in a concept form at this point. I don't have a second sign off. I'm asking for council members to show their interest in approaching this subject with me, and I'm open to suggestions and amendments and any other kind of input that is relevant to the discussion. First of all, just a little bit about ethics in general. In general, there's really 3 types of ethics when you engage in the ethics discussion. There's professional ethics, there's government/business ethics, and there's personal ethics. And when you talk about professional ethics, that's like your doctors, your lawyers, I think journalists. They have codes of professional conduct that they swear to when they receive their degrees and titles. And they receive regular training, I would say, in those fields. I know in law school, we received regular training in ethics in law school, and as part of our continuing legal education, we routinely had ethics, and those were things that we were required to attend. I'm quite sure the medical profession does the same. Government ethics, business ethics. I know that, for example, Citibank has a very detailed ethics code. I know Wells Fargo has a detailed ethics code. So it's a topic of discussion that is broad both in business and in government. And in government, one of the things that I observed and why I'm bringing this proposal is that in our particular situation, we don't have any required training and ongoing training. And I think that is kind of important if you want to develop a culture of ethics in your organization. So I'll eventually get to that, but that's really where this is all headed. Then there's the personal ethics, and personal ethics is that moral compass that we all have, and all of our personal ethics are different. And when I get up and have discussions with the council about ethics, I want to start by saying I believe everybody has a strong moral compass, but they are all different. And that's the reason why ethics codes came about, because they were trying to develop the concept of a codified ethics code for a body, for a group of people, a collective body of standards that would represent the values of that body as a group. because of our personal ethics always, being diverse, and it's unique to ourselves, to our background, to who we are, to a whole volume of things. And what I would also mention is that, ethical behavior does not equal legal behavior. Ethical is more aspirational. It's more that standard of conduct, again, that moral compass, that higher standard, whereas when you have ethics discussions, the law represents the lower standard, the baseline standard. You don't want to do anything that violates the law, but how far up do you want to be above the law? Where do you want to set your ethical standards? And then I would also mention that in that aspirational category, good ethics in the realm of government equals good government. I mean, those governments that instill that culture of ethics and create an environment where people begin to think and act in an ethical way, it creates integrity in the process, it adds merit to the process, and it creates an atmosphere in which the public then responds accordingly, and they have faith in their process and faith in their government. So that's kind of the history of it, and that's why these things were started in the first place. In our particular situation, in our city charter, in section 701, it actually requires that the city have a board of ethics, and it actually lists the things that must be contained in it, but it also says a statement of things that, that this isn't inclusive, exclusive, that we can add things to it, but at a minimum, it asked us to address issues of financial conflicts, and that's really, kind of also known as, financial disclosure, campaign finance law, those kinds of things, the disclosure kinds of requirements. Use of offices, appearances, that's another area that's kind of covered in the charter, and gifts and honoraria. I mean, those are kind of the three things that, I would summarize that section 702 kind of lays out, that those are the areas, that we must, deal with, but it also said if you want, deal with additional areas that you can. And then just to, as by way of summary, again, that was used as the basis for the ethics ordinance that we currently have in place. And really those areas that are dealt with in our ethics ordinance are those areas that were suggested, that we deal with, or mandated, if you will, by our charter. So those are that's what kind of the embodiment of our ethics code is. Since then, there have been other areas where different cities or different governments have dabbled in. Some cities have provisions regarding nepotism in their ethics code. There's other areas that kind of emerged, and again, if the city ever wanted to deal in other areas, there are some emerging areas that we might want to consider taking a look at, because times change and things change, and our charter does actually provide for that. What I presented you in support of my proposition that we engage in ethics training was some material that I found on an internet research authored by Alan Borquez. He's a Texas lawyer, and apparently there's been a lot of activity in Texas in the ethics area. They have a lot of activity going on in their state, and so what's emerged from that is, some people that are actually practicing law in that area, and they have some websites, and so I thought it was just a good summary, and for me, I was looking for something to kind of update me, because it had been years since I had really, took a deep dive into it and saw what was out there. The good news is, when I looked at our ordinance, it seems to really cover still, it's mostly the way it's done. I mean, we have the aspirational standards, which are the canons, and then we have the conflicts of interest and the standards of conduct, which again covers those requirements that were set out in the charter. So that's a common way it's done, was done, and it's still, I think, the most common way of doing it. But when I did look through this summary, and I gave it to you, it's also a summary that I thought it was just so good that I actually gave it to the ethics board several weeks ago in one of their open public input portions of it. I just gave them to it. I said, I just think this is a good, if you take the time to read it, it takes about 40 minutes to really just dive into the details. It's just a good summary of what's going on, out in that world of ethics. And I thought it would be helpful, since we've had ethics discussions, and I'm engaging in one now, to just give everybody a little backdrop, in order to be able to discuss it. about what's going on out there. And one of the things as I read through that, it was kind of a good update for me to kind of see, are there other areas we should be looking at, what's missing? A couple of things popped out at me, and one of the first ones that popped out at me was the fact that we didn't have any ongoing training. And that ongoing training, we had training in the past, and I had some discussions with Deborah Owen, who worked as the city clerk for a while, trying to just figure out what the history was. She remembers, there being, ongoing ethics training, and then she remembers after she left, she believes is when it stopped. So I don't know exactly when it stopped, but there was a point where it was a routine part of council training, it was a routine part of employee training, and the board was routinely trained, on their ethics ordinance and their responsibilities and general ethics principles. So when I saw this suggestion that if you want to develop a culture of ethics in your government, again, if you want people to think and make decisions, cognizant that they're doing it in an ethical way, one of the best ways to do that is to have ongoing training on what your ethics, ethics responsibilities are. And I just thought that made good sense. It's something that, again, when we adopted the ordinance, it never came up. It's because we were just doing it. So it's one of those things you look back afterwards and you think, okay, maybe this should be codified, and that will make sure that it continues to get done on an ongoing basis. So, what I would say about it is I think that what you're looking for, again, when you do that, is you're looking for a top-down and bottom-up, ethics mentality in your organization. When you have the training, at the uppermost levels, with the council and the mayor, and then you have their board fully trained on what their responsibilities are, and you have your employees trained, at all levels, your government is thinking and acting in a way that's consistent with our ethics ordinance and our ethics responsibility. Again, I think that equates to good government. It creates a confidence in government and a confidence in the decision-making process. So I think that this would be, very helpful in on an ongoing basis for us to have that kind of training. I guess as a final statement, then the next steps. Again, I did present this to the ethics board. I actually mentioned to them that I thought that was one of the things that we could take a look at. And for what it's worth, I think another area that we should take a look at is our list of the punitive list, for violations of the ordinance. Ours just jumps immediately to a reprimand. And there are other things out there. There's a warning, there's an admonishment, there's a lot more layers out there, I think, that I saw when I read this summary. And I thought that would make more sense to me, that we kind of embellish on that a little bit, add more opportunities, should there be a violation, for people to be nurtured along the way and not just kind of move to an immediate punishment. So that's one thing that I'd like to, see some further dialogue on as well. But for now, I just thought this one was just something that, just made really, really good sense to me. I think it would be an easy change. And what I'd like to do next is, again, I'd like to enlist, any of the council members who are interested in working with me on this. But my next step would be to actually take it to the ethics board and make and ask them to hold a public hearing on it, take public input, have an open discussion on it, and then offer me any suggestions, recommendations, amendments, anything that they have, because they are our ethics experts in our city, and they are the board responsible for enforcing it. So I didn't want to be presumptuous and just try to get something passed without actually going to them in a formal way that would also enlist the public as well, and get a formal recommendation from them on whether they think this is a good idea or not. So that would be my next step, would be to send it to them and ask that they have a hearing and a discussion on it, and then offer any recommendations. After that, if they actually offer some recommendations or amendments, I would bring it back to the council in this format again first. But if they don't offer any recommendations or suggestions to it, and they do offer a recommendation to pass it, then I would just suggest that we put it on for our first reading. But again, I'd end where I began. It's a concept discussion. It was an easy concept to codify, so that's why there's an ordinance before you. But if there's a different direction we should be going, if there's amendments or, I'm wide open. I just want to, engage the council in the discussion, and I would like to make this very collaborative. So at this point, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
Thank you. Questions from the council? Anybody on the line that have questions? Thank you. Seeing no questions.
Thank you.
At this point of our agenda, we're to public comment. If anybody from the public would like to speak on anything brought up today, you have up to 5 minutes. Seeing nobody, we're adjourned. Thank you.